The silence was worse than the screaming. You have to imagine a silence so heavy it presses against your eardrums like deep water. 50,000 people in the Colosseum were holding their breath, waiting for the monster to move. Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. And, a man, no, a creature, stood over a fallen opponent. His face was a ruin of scar tissue, burned and slashed until he looked more like a demon from the underworld than a human being. They called him Draxus the Devourer. He didn't fight for glory. He fought to silence the noise in his head. But today, the monster wasn't roaring. He was trembling. Because he knew that the only way to save the one thing he loved was to let himself be destroyed. Draxus had a reputation that cleared rooms. When he walked down the narrow stone corridors of the Ludus Magnus, other gladiators pressed themselves against the walls. They didn't look him in the eye. You don't look a predator in the eye unless you want to be eaten. He was 7 feet of callus and muscle, a man who had been taken from the mines of Thrace as a child and molded into a killing machine. For 20 years, he had known nothing but the weight of iron and the smell of fear. He never spoke. He never celebrated. He simply executed. His face was his curse. A pot of boiling oil during a siege had taken his left side, leaving a twisted, melted mask that made children cry and women faint. He wore it like a warning, stay away. There is nothing human left here, but even monsters need to breathe. Every evening, just as the sun dipped below the 7 hills of Rome, the guards allowed the top-tier gladiators 1 hour of fresh air in the outer courtyard, near the iron gates that separated the school from the street. Draxus usually stood in the darkest corner, under the shadow of a cypress tree, avoiding the light. But one evening, 6 months ago, the wind changed. It didn't smell of the latrines or the sweat of the training pits. It smelled of lavender and wild roses. You know that feeling when a scent hits you and suddenly you are transported back to a time before the pain. For a second, Draxus wasn't a slave. He was a boy in the mountains again. He followed the scent to the iron gate. Sitting on the other side, on the dirty cobblestones of the street, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 18. Her clothes were rags, patches of brown and gray, but her lap was full of bright, vibrant flowers. Her eyes were a milky white, staring at nothing, yet seeing everything. She was blind. Draxus froze. He knew he should step back. If she saw him, no. If she sensed him, she would scream. Everyone screamed. But she didn't. She tilted her head, her ears twitching like a fawn's. "Who is there?" she asked, her voice like a bell in a graveyard. "You are big. You block the wind." Draxus didn't answer. He couldn't remember the last time he had used his voice for anything other than a grunt of exertion. "You smell like sand," she said, smiling. A genuine smile. Imagine that. No one had smiled at him in 20 years without mocking him. "And old leather. Are you a soldier?" Draxus grunted, a low rumble in his chest. "A man of few words," she laughed, picking up a small sprig of lavender. "I like that. Words lie. The wind doesn't. My name is Aurelia. I sell flowers to the lovers walking by. But no one is buying today. Would you like one?" She held the flower through the bars. Draxus looked at his hand. It was the size of a shovel, covered in scars, stained with the memory of violence. He hesitated. He was terrified that his touch would wither the flower, that his very presence would corrupt her innocence. But her hand remained steady, waiting. Slowly, with the trembling care of a man defusing a bomb, Draxus reached out. His thick fingers brushed her small, pale palm. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away from the rough, calloused skin that felt more like rock than flesh. "You have working hands," she whispered. "Strong hands. Hands that protect. Draxus took the flower. He felt a crack in the ice that encased his soul. She didn't see the monster. She only felt the man. If you are loving this story, make sure you are subscribed. We upload daily legends from the arena. That was the beginning. Every evening, Draxus went to the gate. He never spoke, but Aurelia talked enough for both of them. She told him about the street cats she named, about the grumpy baker who burned the bread, about how the rain felt on her face. She called him the silent guardian. She thought he was a guard or a trainer. She had no idea she was talking to the butcher of Rome. And Draxus, for 1 hour a day, he wasn't the butcher. He was just a listener. He started saving his food, apples, fresh bread, bits of cheese, and passing them through the bars to her. She looked healthier. Her smile grew brighter. That smile became the only thing keeping him sane. When he fought in the arena, he didn't fight with rage anymore. He fought with precision, ending fights quickly so he could get back to the gate. Back to her, but in Rome, secrets are a currency, and someone is always counting. The lanista who owned Draxus was a man named Silas. Silas was a snake in a silk robe, a man who loved gold more than he loved the gods. He had noticed the change in his prize beast. He noticed the flower dried and pressed into the strap of Draxus's armor. He noticed the food missing from the tray. And Silas, being a man who exploited every weakness, decided to watch. One evening, as Draxus sat by the gate listening to Aurelia hum a tune, a shadow fell over them. Silas stepped out from behind the cypress tree, 2 armed guards flanking him. Touching, Silas sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Truly touching. The monster has a pet. Draxus stood up instantly, placing his massive body between Silas and the gate, shielding Aurelia. A low growl erupted from his throat, a sound so primal it made the guard step back. Who is that? Aurelia asked, fear spiking in her voice. Guardian. What is happening? Guardian. Silas laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Oh, sweet child. This is no guardian. This is Draxus. The devourer. The man who ripped the throat out of the Gaul last week with his teeth. You are having a picnic with a demon. No, Aurelia whispered, shaking her head. He is gentle. He is my friend. Silas looked at Draxus, his eyes gleaming with a sick idea. He walked closer to the bars. He looked at Aurelia's blindness, at her vulnerability. Then he looked back at Draxus. I have a problem, Draxus. The games are tomorrow. Emperor Nero has a new favorite fighter. A boy named Lucius. Pretty, fast, and very expensive. Nero wants Lucius to be a star. He wants Lucius to defeat a legend. He wants him to defeat you. Draxus clenched his fists. He could crush Lucius in 10 seconds. He had never lost. He didn't know how to lose. Silas leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Draxus could hear. I know what you are thinking. You will kill the boy. But if you do... Silas reached through the bars and grabbed Aurelia's wrist. She screamed, a short, sharp sound that tore through Draxus's heart. Draxus lunged, slamming against the bars, but the guards pointed their spears at Aurelia's chest. Listen to me, beast, Silas hissed. You will fight Lucius tomorrow. And you will lose. You will let him cut you. You will let him humiliate you. And finally, you will let him deliver the killing blow. Draxus stared at him. His breath coming in jagged gasps. You want me to die? Silas smiled. I want you to make a choice. If you kill Lucius, my guards will slit this pretty little throat right here on the street. If you die, she lives. I will give her a bag of gold and safe passage to the countryside. I swear it on the sticks. Draxus looked at Aurelia. She was trembling, tears streaming from her sightless eyes. Guardian. She whimpered. Please. I'm scared. Draxus felt the world narrowing down to a single point. His life. Or hers. He had spent 20 years taking lives. He had bathed in blood. Maybe this was justice. Maybe this was the only way to wash his hands clean. He looked at Silas. He nodded once. Good, Silas said, releasing Aurelia's wrist. Make it look real. If you hesitate, if you fight back, she dies before you hit the ground. The next day, the arena was louder than Draxus had ever heard it. He stood in the tunnel, the darkness hugging him like an old friend. He wasn't wearing his heavy armor. Silas had forbidden it. He wore only a loincloth and held a dull sword. He was walking out to his execution. He closed his eyes. He didn't think about the pain that was coming. He thought about the smell of lavender. He thought about the feeling of a small hand in his. The gates opened. The light was blinding. The announcer screamed his name. Draxus the Devourer. The crowd roared, expecting a massacre. They didn't know they were about to witness a sacrifice. At the other end of the arena stood Lucius. Young, arrogant. Shining in gold armor. He waved to the crowd, soaking in the adoration. He had no idea that the monster across from him wasn't going to fight. Draxus stepped onto the sand. He looked up at the Emperor's box. He looked at Silas, who was holding a red scarf. The signal. Silas pointed to a spot in the crowd near the front row. There, surrounded by 2 guards, sat Aurelia. She looked small and terrified, her head turning frantically, trying to understand the noise. Silas held a knife behind her chair. The message was clear. Die, and she lives. Fight, and she dies. Draxus tightened his grip on his useless sword. His heart wasn't racing with rage today. It was heavy with a strange, sorrowful peace. He looked at Lucius, who was twirling his blade, eager to make a name for himself. You have to understand the strength it takes not to fight back. It is easy to kill. It is easy to let the instinct take over. But to stand there, to lower your shield, to offer your throat to the wolf. That takes a power that muscles cannot give you. Lucius charged. The crowd screamed. Draxus stood his ground, his eyes fixed not on his opponent, but on the blind girl in the stands. He whispered one word, a word no one heard but the gods. Smile. Lucius swung. The blade cut deep into Draxus's shoulder. Blood sprayed onto the hot sand. The crowd gasped. Draxus didn't counterattack. He stumbled back. Feigning weakness, but the pain was real. He saw Lucius smile, emboldened by the first blood. The boy came again, faster this time. Lucius struck again, the steel biting deep into the meat of Draxus's thigh, spraying crimson onto the hot sands of the arena. The crowd didn't cheer this time, they gasped, the sound sucking the air out of the massive stone bowl of the Colosseum. You have to feel the weight of this moment. Draxus, a man who could snap a bull's neck with one hand, fell to his knees. He wasn't acting anymore. The blood loss was real. His vision was swimming, blurring into a haze of gold and red. But through the haze, he kept his eyes locked on one spot in the stands, the small, terrified figure of Aurelia. She was gripping the arms of her chair, her knuckles white, her head turning frantically as the smell of blood reached her nose. Behind her, Silas smiled, his hand resting casually on the hilt of the dagger hidden in his toga. He nodded at Lucius. Finish it. Lucius laughed, a sound that grated against the silence of the 50,000 spectators. He circled Draxus like a hyena circling a dying lion. He kicked Draxus in the ribs. Crack. The sound echoed. Draxus grunted but didn't lift his sword. He couldn't. If he raised his hand in defense, the knife would go into Aurelia's heart. You know that nightmare where you try to run but your legs won't move? This was worse. He could move. He had the power of a god in his arms. But he had to let a boy he could crush like an insect tear him apart piece by piece. Is this the legend? Lucius shouted to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. Is this the monster you fear? He bleeds like a pig. He cowers like a slave. Lucius stepped in close, grabbing Draxus by his scarred, melted ear. He whispered, low enough so only Draxus could hear, "You are pathetic, old man. Silas told me about the girl. He told me the deal." Lucius leaned in closer, his breath smelling of wine and arrogance. "But do you really think he's going to let her go? A blind witness? No. After I take your head, I'm going to pay her a visit. And once I've had my fun, Silas is going to feed her to the dogs." Time stopped. You know that moment when a dam breaks? When the pressure becomes so great that the structure simply ceases to exist? That is what happened inside Draxus. The deal was a lie. It was always a lie. Whether he died or fought, Aurelia was doomed. Silas had played him. Lucius had mocked him. And in doing so, they had made a fatal error. They thought they were negotiating with a man. But Draxus wasn't a man. He was the devourer. Lucius raised his sword for the execution strike. He aimed for the neck. But the blade never landed. With a speed that defied logic, Draxus's left hand, the hand everyone thought was weak, shot up. He caught the blade. Not the hilt. The blade. The steel sliced into his palm, severing tendons, grinding against bone, but Draxus didn't let go. He squeezed. Blood poured down his arm, but his grip was iron. Lucius's eyes went wide. He tried to pull the sword back, but it was stuck in a vice. Slowly, painfully, Draxus stood up. The silence in the Colosseum was absolute. Even the Emperor stood up. Draxus looked into Lucius's eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, he spoke. His voice was a grinding sound, like tectonic plates shifting deep underground. "You should have killed me when I was on my knees." Draxus yanked the sword. He didn't just pull it, he ripped it from Lucius's hands. Then, with a roar that sounded like a volcano erupting, Draxus headbutted the boy. The sound of Lucius's nose shattering was louder than the drums. Lucius fell back, dazed, terrified. He crawled backward across the sand. "Wait!" he screamed. "Wait! I yield! I yield!" Draxus didn't hear him. He was looking at the stands. He was looking at Silas. Silas panicked. He saw the change. He saw the demon return. He grabbed Aurelia by the hair, pulling her head back, raising the knife. "Do it!" Silas screamed at the arena. "Die, or I kill her now." Draxus had a split second. He was 50 yards away. He had a stolen sword in his hand. He had a shattered hand. He had no shield. He looked at the distance. He looked at the knife touching Aurelia's throat. You have to understand the physics of what happened next. It shouldn't have been possible. Draxus stepped back, his body coiling like a spring. He screamed, not a war cry, but a name. "Aurelia! Drop!" Trust is a terrifying thing. Aurelia didn't ask why. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself off the chair, collapsing onto the floorboards of the viewing box. In the same heartbeat, Draxus threw the sword. The weapon flew through the air, end over end, a blur of silver in the afternoon sun. It soared over the arena wall, over the first rows of the senators, rising, rising. Silas tried to duck. But he was too slow. The sword didn't hit Silas. It hit the wooden pillar right next to his head, burying itself deep into the timber with a thunderous thud, slicing through the sleeve of his silk robe, pinning his arm to the structure. Silas screamed, dropping the knife, thrashing like a butterfly pinned to a board. The crowd erupted. It wasn't applause. It was pandemonium. They had never seen anything like it. A gladiator attacking a lanista. It was rebellion. It was madness. It was glorious. Draxus didn't wait to see if the shot landed. He ran. He charged toward the arena wall, finding handholds in the stone that weren't there. He climbed like a spider, pulling his massive bulk up the 12-foot barrier. Guards rushed to stop him, spears lowered. But the crowd did something incredible. They began to throw food, cushions, and sandals at the guards. They blocked the aisles. They were protecting the monster. Draxus vaulted the rail. He landed in the VIP box. Silas was whimpering, trying to pull his arm free. Draxus didn't even look at him. He knelt beside the small ball of rags on the floor. "Guardian?" Aurelia whispered, shaking uncontrollably. "I am here," Draxus rumbled, his voice shaking. "I am here." He scooped her up in his arms. She was so light. She buried her face in his bloody chest, sobbing. Draxus turned to leave, but the way was blocked. A dozen Praetorian guards stood there, swords drawn. Behind them stood Emperor Nero. The Emperor looked at Draxus. He looked at the bleeding monster holding the blind girl like she was made of glass. He looked at Silas, pinned to the wall like a common thief. Nero smiled. He raised his hand. The guard stiffened, ready to attack. "The lanista cheated," Nero said, his voice bored but carrying a dangerous edge. "He threatened a citizen to fix a match. That is, distasteful." Nero looked at Draxus. "You entertained me, beast. You gave me a drama better than any play. Go." The guards sheathed their swords and stepped aside. Draxus didn't bow. He didn't thank the Emperor. He simply walked out of the Colosseum, carrying Aurelia, leaving a trail of blood on the marble floors. They say he never fought again. If you are enjoying this story, make sure you are subscribed. We bring you the legends history tried to forget, 6 months later. High in the mountains of Umbria, far from the stink of Rome, there is a small cottage. It smells of pine needles and wood smoke. Outside, a man is chopping wood. He moves slowly. His left hand is stiff, scarred, and useless for gripping an axe, so he swings with his right. He stops and wipes sweat from his ruined face. He looks terrifying to anyone who doesn't know him. "Dinner is ready." A voice calls from the window. Aurelia stands there. She is wearing a clean dress. Her cheeks are pink. She isn't selling flowers on a dirty street anymore. She is growing them in her own garden. Draxus walks to the window. He touches her face with his good hand. She leans into his touch, smiling that smile that brought an empire to its knees. "What are you looking at?" she asks playfully. "Everything," Draxus says. And for the first time in his life, he realizes he isn't blind either. He sees the world not as a place to be devoured, but as a place to be protected. History remembers Draxus as a monster. The records say he killed 300 men. But in that small cottage in the mountains, he is just the guardian. He realized that the strongest hands aren't the ones that can crush a skull, but the ones that can hold a flower without crushing it. And that brings us back to the question we started with. We all have monsters inside us. We all have scars that make us want to hide from the world. But Draxus proved that no matter how broken you are, no matter how dark your past is, you are worthy of the light if you are brave enough to fight for it. This is Marcus. Thank you for watching. Do you think Nero let them go because of mercy, or because he feared what the crowd would do if he killed them? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories of glory and redemption. Until next time, keep fighting.